Did Bernie Sanders honeymoon in Soviet Russia? Hi, thanks for watching. Today's Friday, Fact Check Friday. I've got what I think is a fun one today. It's this rumor that Bernie Sanders honeymooned in Moscow. He honeymooned in Soviet Russia, right? That's the rumor. I've heard this come up a bunch recently, and we're going to talk about that today. Let's go to this article from The Telegraph. Here it is. Bernie Sanders' honeymoon in Russia coming under scrutiny as Democratic race heats up. The Democratic presidential candidate spent his honeymoon behind the Iron Curtain in 1988 to, quote, learn from each other. And we scroll down, we see a real angry photo of Bernie. He's looking really angry there, because that's fair reporting. The year was 1988, and Bernie Sanders was in the Soviet Union, bare-chested singing, "This land is your land," as those around him downed vodka. Silly that anyone would be bare-chested in what I believe was a sauna, which is what you do in a sauna. But whatever, let's keep going. Mr. Sanders, then the socialist mayor of Burlington, Vermont, had chosen to spend his honeymoon behind the Iron Curtain to, quote, learn from each other, he later said. Says Robert O'Brien, Donald Trump's national security advisor, said, quote, well, there are these reports that they, Russia, want Bernie Sanders to get elected president. That's no surprise. He honeymooned in Moscow. At a rally in Las Vegas last week, Mr. Trump said, quote, Putin wants to make sure I get elected? Doesn't he want to see who the Democrat is going to be? Wouldn't he rather have Bernie, who honeymooned in Moscow? And last week, the Washington Post reported that Russia has been clandestinely trying to boost Mr. Sanders' campaign. Now, this sounds like a bunch of Russiagate Part 2, right? Part 2, Electric Boogaloo, right? It's silly. This is really silly. Let's talk about what happened. Now, look, there are many criticisms that you can have with Bernie Sanders, but I say do the exact same thing that you do with Trump, that you should do with Trump. That is, you don't need to make anything up. You just need to go with their record, go with their actions, go with what they actually said. That's the problem. The press, when they're covering Donald Trump, often they just make stuff up and they exaggerate things. There's no reason to do that. There's enough that you can talk about Trump without having to make things up. It's the same thing with Bernie Sanders. There's many criticisms that people could have with him, but you don't have to make stuff up. He didn't honeymoon in the Soviet Union. Yes, technically, he went to the Soviet Union with an entourage because they had set up a sister cities program. Now, this is something that a lot of cities do. Your city probably has one as well, where they have different sister cities around the world, and it's to promote tourism and whatnot. Here in Portland, I don't know who it is, but I'm sure we have sister cities in many countries all over the world. We probably have a sister city in Russia. I'm sure we probably do. And what Bernie did, he was married in 1988, and later that year, they did go on a trip to the Soviet Union to visit then Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, Moscow, and then they went to the little city that they made the sister city with. Sounds like a good trip. I mean, if you're going to criticize it, who paid for the trip, right? That might be a criticism, but it wasn't a honeymoon, right? You don't take an entourage of a dozen city leaders with you on your honeymoon. That's ridiculous. I think he did go on an actual honeymoon the following year to a beautiful tropical island. So the claim that he honeymooned in the Soviet Union, that's not true. Now, I don't think Bernie helped himself because I think he would make the joke, right? It was a rather unusual honeymoon I had. You know, he would say things like that. And yeah, if you say things like that, guess what? People are going to use it against you. And that's what they're doing right now. But He didn't honeymoon in Soviet Russia. And in 1988, it wasn't even the height of the Cold War or anything like that. It had really cooled. In fact, I went to Russia myself in 1989, in March. In fact, I was, such a tourist, I had to get the little Lenin bust here. I dug this up today as I was going through things to prepare for this video. I did have, let's see, I got one of these Ushenka hats, little fur hat here. This is me in the red. Look exhausted, maybe hungover, who knows? I look like a child there, just, so young. But here was me on the train. I'll try to put these on the screen. Behind me, if you're a subway geek like me, you'll recognize this map as the Moscow subway. I did get to travel out to some of the far suburbs, and I got to go to a grocery store that was pretty much empty. And why are all these pictures fuzzy? Why are they fuzzy? I got something on the focusing screen of my point-and-shoot camera, and, whatever. I was young. I didn't know how they worked. So I got back, and all my photos were a little out of focus. But here I am in Red Square. This is like the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, or whatever, and here I am striking the thinking pose there. I was there at the same time. It wasn't this big, scary Soviet Union, you can't go there unless you're a communist. Because if that's the case, then you got to put it on me too. And yeah, that seems ridiculous to me. He took a trip. He took his wife. He had an entourage. They did go to the Soviet Union, technically, shortly after he was married. I wouldn't call that a honeymoon at all. I think it's disingenuous to say that. There's enough criticism that you can have with Bernie Sanders that you don't have to make stuff like this up. That's ridiculous. But, that's just my opinion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Peace.